Whether or not you think greed is good, there's a little debate that money makes the world go around. And when it comes to the price is right, you don't want to be wrong. In today's global, interconnected, digital economy, what if? What if you could predict the precise price likely to result in the best revenue or margin outcomes for each part of your business? In the future, this decision will become a process that employs data, algorithms, and software to make recommendations better and faster than humans. Greetings, everyone, and welcome from the Technology Association of Georgia. This is Tech Talk, January 8th, 2016. I'm your host, Frank Baia. What if? What if there was a technology that by examining all possible choices predicted the outcome of each and selecting the one price that will maximize your business results? Instantly considering all the possible price choices, predicting the revenue and profit outcomes of each, and select the one that maximizes business objectives. Yikes, is that possible? Up to the Tech Talk automated price optimization software and the value and return for customers resulting from a technology that optimizes revenue while it provides new economy pricing management solutions. On this edition of Tech Talk, the price is right. And with today's advanced price optimization technology, you can make the most of your competitive position without leaving a single dollar on the table. We Tech Talk with the Executive Vice President for Alpharetta-based Rainmaker Group, Dom Beveridge. Prior to his current role, Dom was General Manager of the Multifamily Data Exchange, a new Rainmaker venture, offering performance benchmarking for the multifamily housing industry. He has nearly 20 years of experience in market analytics, pricing, and revenue management across 3 continents in a variety of industries. It's the use of mathematical analysis by a company to determine how customers will respond to different prices for its products and services through different channels, and how to determine the right price best to meet your company's sales and margin objectives, while at the same time maximizing operating profit. We Tech Talk with Executive Vice President and the industry marketed leader at Rainmaker, Dom Beveridge. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Dom, welcome to Tech Talk.
Hey, Frank, how are you?
Good, thanks. Dom, I think that obviously in the evolution of what's going on with the high-speed connectivity, clouds, apps, Internet of Things, certainly there's a heck of a lot of disruption that's happening, and yet under the surface, a lot of demand, a lot of requirements are being placed on managing revenues and how do you relate to pricing structures in a market that's so dynamic. Let's talk a little bit about that. From a standpoint of a subject matter expert, relate to, say, for example, in the fintech industry or even in the healthcare industry, how does a technology work in order to help orchestrate a benefit out of that situation?
In financial services or technology?
Well, whatever vertical you'd like to talk about. I'm obviously.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Well, a couple of examples really of that come from what we would call revenue management industries, like industries that have some pedigree in this process of using data to figure out what they should charge for a product. In particular, like the easiest frame of reference to use to understand this is the airline industry, right? Okay. So, airlines for many years, since the 1980s, have been using these advanced technologies to, crunch transaction data, to produce demand forecasts, and ultimately to figure out what price they should charge to maximize their revenue performance on a given flight. These are some of the, although people are kind of increasingly using technologies like these and other technologies that they have spawned, these technologies have been around for a long time, and it's an area that's very kind of close to us at Rainmaker.
So from the standpoint of market-driven pricing, could you say, and I don't think it's obviously relegated only to the airlines. I'm going to think, I mentioned healthcare, for example, is one of the areas that I'm going to guess at a certain level of supply and demand, insurance, a lot of dynamics come into play. Is that the kind of thing that can be actually managed and predicted and actually set up as far as a predictable pricing is concerned?
So the examples that you've picked are interesting ones. I mean, healthcare pricing it obviously has some very, very specific considerations to it. You know, a hospital doesn't get a completely free hand in deciding how much it's going to charge for its services, right? It has many and complex agreements in place with various insurers and so on. There's obviously ethical requirements involved in that as well. So healthcare is probably the least kind of market-driven pricing regime that I could imagine. But there are lots of other examples. Yeah, probably lots of clearer examples of how the market is and how analytics are being used to get their arms around the market and understand understand pricing trends and so on. Top of mind, I guess everybody's familiar with things like the surge pricing that Uber is becoming famous for right now. There's a very direct example of how a provider is using information about the market to set prices.
So, and I guess I mentioned healthcare. I think obviously it's inevitable because at some point what you're kind of talking about, I guess, is the whole redefining of a value proposition. Because isn't the market-driven? It isn't alone. What are some of the criteria that would determine some of the information that you would or decisions that you would come up with in terms of a value? Would value proposition obviously still plays a part in terms of pricing, but yet supply and demand, right? So I mean, even electronic transactions become a factor in terms of physical transactions.
Yeah, and again, it's very specific to the industry that you're working in. Like, personally, my own very close involvement with this currently is in these industries that do revenue management, right? So travel, hospitality, and also in the multifamily housing industry. These are industries where it's not simply the case that I'm looking at market trends to determine pricing. I've also got this, I've also got this fixed asset that I have to optimize, right? You only get to sell a hotel room once, which means I have to understand the market trends, and I also have to understand my inventory in order to make good decisions. That's the kind of thing that we Rainmaker specialize in. Areas like the healthcare industry, for example, I'm not entirely sure that it's the value prop that's driving your pricing there. There are a number of other factors in healthcare that are probably going to trump value proposition in terms of what you end up charging for a service.
Well, you say that now, but I guess you would say the same thing about a hotel room at some point. But I think now it's a case where, like you're saying, inventory, availability, competitive positioning. I'm not trying to tell you your business, but I guess I'm fascinated by the concept because the inevitability of this kind of ability, if you will, technology, is going to become pervasive. And I would think not only limited to the industries you're talking about, but Amazon. I mean, in a sense, wouldn't everything kind of be driven by a certain amount of the market versus a pure value consideration? Look at product pricing in terms of, let's take an inevitable large screen television set for the Christmas season or football season, and how that is bandied about from a few $100s to a few $1,000s, depending on the ability of the consumer to find the right place at the right price at the right time. I mean, is that the kind of thing that we're talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of, as I said before, there are lots of different sets of circumstances that lead to different types of pricing. I mean, Amazon, for example, is a retailer, and what tends to happen in retail is that you price as if there's an infinite supply of whatever it is that you're trying to sell, right? Unless you're in danger of stocking out of something, in which case it behooves you to increase prices. So that would be big screen TVs close to the Super Bowl. The possibility of running out of big screen TVs will potentially cause you to raise your prices. But other than that, it's basically you're going to charge whatever you think the market will support, and you're going to do so with the assumption that there's never going to be a shortage of supply of that product. That really underpins the way that retailers price things. Again, when we look at some of the other industries where, and I'm obviously drawing on the expertise that's closest to us right now,
sure.
Those industries where you can't price as if there's an infinite amount of supply, like there's only a set number of seats on an airplane, there's only a set number of rooms in a hotel, there's only a set number of rental cars on a lot, et cetera, et cetera. Those are industries where you have to understand both the supply and the demand side of the equation in order to make good pricing decisions. And that calls for a slightly different set of expertise than the pure sort of retail model that you described with Amazon.
So,
but there are, go.
Well, how does this manifest itself? Does it manifest itself to an individual service that's done by each individual client from a technology standpoint now? Is that something you embed or provide to them to implement themselves, or is it a case where you're dealing on a platform in which all that information is put into a centralized location? How does it actually manifest itself from the standpoint of concept to reality? And let's take an airline, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, the short answer is the technologies that people use to support their decisions are different according to the business problem. The kinds of data points that Amazon or Walmart or any big retailer might use, and the kinds of decision technologies that they use are going to be completely different from the ones that they would use in any of the airline, the hotel, etc. industries that I was talking about. Interesting thing is that from the consumer perspective, there's probably not that much difference between those two things, right? A consumer is not really interested in an airline supply conditions when they're reviewing the price of a flight. They simply view whether the price has gone up or gone down, and they would view the same thing when looking at a very transparent pricing platform like Amazon. So I guess from a consumer value prop, etc. perspective, they look kind of the same from the surface, but on the supplier side, the technologies that people are using to make those decisions are typically quite different.
Well, does the technology deal with analytics of some kind, predictive and even prescriptive analytics? I'm guessing it's the only way you could predict a market value in terms of a competitive pricing for any given moment.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, very much so. And if we think about the things that have changed over the last few years, the ubiquity of shopping data, technologies that go and grab data from all of the different internet sites to allow you to know exactly where your competitor's price position is relative to yours. Rainmaker obviously made a couple of acquisitions in that space in the last year or so. These we see as being absolutely integral to the way that people do pricing. So I would say that it's a very common thread that you're going to find between all of the different examples that we talked about, is that whatever predictive technologies they are using, and predictive technologies, as you described, are very, very common in these industries, they are increasingly baking in this view of what the competition is doing based on all these data resources that are out there.
Well, and I'm trying to digest what is I'm sure something that you deal with in a lot of depth every single day in solving a lot of individual client problems and providing them with innovations and other opportunities from a cold technology standpoint, from an outsider looking in, and maybe even from a consumer standpoint. I'm trying to put my arms around it and try to embrace, exactly what it is that happens in order for you to be able to predict. I can understand the need to have the ability. In fact, what I probably can't understand is why someone wouldn't do this. How do people understand that they need your help, and how do you find them, and what are the steps that get involved in the relationship?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, and this touches on what I do, like demand generation for Rainmaker. In particular, I find that increasingly companies who are looking to generate demand for technologies find that nowadays you have to engage people not on the question of what your products do, but on the question of what problems do they have that need to be solved. Like often problems that they don't recognize that they have today in the way that they go about their business. So. You
just hit it on a fascinating point. I get it, because I can remember Steve Jobs saying something like, people don't know what they want until they see it. So how is it that you establish, say, for example, a market pricing situation in advance of some new technology that no one's ever seen before? So
yeah, and I mean, it's a great question. Let me give you a real life example from the world of multifamily housing, like the apartment industry. There you have this problem where you have to price leases, right, for rental units. And you have to do so with an understanding of what the next year, the next 18 months is likely to look like in this market or for this given property. So we have, there's a whole industry of systems that set prices for apartment units, right? The multifamily revenue management, we call it. Well, you then have to think about, from Rainmaker's perspective, we have to think about, well, what's better about the way that we do this than the way that other companies do this? Because, on the face of it, if we're just looking at the fact that, well, we change prices and our competitors change prices, like what's the difference between all these applications? The reality is most of the things that that differentiate these products are quite specific. They require that you kind of think about how this process works. So a good example, like right now, is this idea of what we call lease expiration management, right? So this idea of taking into account when it's desirable to have an apartment unit become vacant, right? So if we think about that as something that you factor into how you would price a lease, right? Well, this lease is attractive, but if it means that unit is going to be empty at a time when I don't want it to be, then that should factor into my price. To make people understand that, to engage people on that, you have to make them aware of the fact that they are currently likely losing money because they are not doing this, right? If you are using an application that doesn't factor this into the equation, all of these leases that look valuable and attractive to you right now, perhaps you would have been better off taking a cheaper lease that doesn't leave you with a vacancy problem 6 or 9 months from now. Do you see what I mean? So
Sure. Making
them aware that the decisions they're taking are perhaps not as good as they think they are. That's the key to getting people involved in the conversation about this technology.
Well, to put you on the spot, how do you do that? How do they know they need your help until you actually get in front of them and draw, I'm guessing, some form of value comparison that creates a differentiation? I'm just fascinated by it, because if I think I'm understanding you correctly in terms of the long-term proposition for what you guys are into, when you're dealing with, we talked earlier about disruptive technologies, or we talk about disruption all the time. Disruption is usually a case of something that's so new and so different that it has no precedent. And so when you're sitting there deciding what is your revenue model going to be for something, I'm going to guess they're going to have to determine how do we price this thing in order to know it's, where we're going to position ourselves and what kind of success or failure we're going to have, and what's the bottom line going to be without a certain amount of demand generation. I'm guessing, is that correct? Is it a case where go ahead.
No, all I was going to say was that obviously you have to generate demand for disruptive products, but you also have to generate demand for the ones that are stable. Like
Sure.
The products we have are in markets that are where the value propositions of the products are pretty well understood, but there's still tons and tons of business to be competed for.
You're saying don't worry about the startups. There's plenty of existing, let's call legacy industries that don't have the sophistication to be able to compete with the kind of tool that you're talking about. So
yes, but I mean, there's also, you've got to tailor the marketing message for the level of maturity of the product, right? So you have to think about who all is buying this product in this market right now. How is the profile of buyers changing in a market? You have to think about things like who are the new competitors. We have new competitors emerging all the time. And we also purchase like some companies that are disrupting their industries ourselves, right? So it's a fairly normal mix of marketing problems that we face, that you probably find that anyone running marketing in a software company is facing too. The common denominator between all of these things is that you have to show people why this thing is relevant to them, and you can't do this anymore by, if you think about the old school way of selling things to people, especially B2B, which is the business that we're in, the old way of looking at this was people learn most of what they're going to learn about your product by talking to a sales rep, right? So that was always the way that the most effective way that you educated clients. I mean, the reality is, what all of the research seems to point to is that most people do about 70% of their research on any product that they buy, be it a leisure product, a business product, like whatever it is. They do about 70% of the research themselves online before they even talk to one of your people. Now, what that means is that you want 70% of everything that you say to the market to be about the stuff that people are curious about or potentially curious about. So if you think of brochures and that kind of thing being the core of most of people's marketing content, maybe 10 years ago, now probably about less than a quarter of what you have to produce is stuff that's about your products. Like above 70% of everything you produce is thought leadership content, and it's all about the problems that people either recognize that they have or currently don't recognize that they have, because that's the point at which most people's journey begins in terms of becoming aware of what you do and why it might be a fit for them.
Well, we've kind of skirted over it. Some cases you've detailed it, but as we close our conversation, go back over it. Does the demand generation approach change the types of technologies that you're using and the way that you're using them? Is there a case for that?
Absolutely. So the emphasis for us is, and it's very common you find among business-to-business providers, is to do with helping to manage people through this process of learning about your products. So you hear it talked about a lot. You hear about inbound marketing is a big sort of industry trend, and the biggest proponents of this is a company called HubSpot, a Boston-based company who we actually use heavily now. These are technologies that are designed first of all to help people find whatever content it is that you're creating. So say if you become very active in blogging about these issues that you're trying to engage a market on, the idea of bringing more and more people to your site and giving them more and more opportunities to learn, just being a better and better resource in terms of positioning good content to them. That's really where B2B marketing is going. That's where you get the biggest bang for your buck. Just figuring out how to really use your content to get the conversation going and just being the best resource that you can be to helping people to learn about your stuff. So, I would suspect you find most B2B companies are either considering or are some way into the process of becoming more like an inbound marketing organization. And ultimately for us, being a Georgia-based, Atlanta-based company, it's also kind of influencing the kinds of people that we're hiring. We want people who are good at that kind of stuff, good writers, people who understand the technologies, the technology landscape in the industry that helps us to find customers and just get everybody involved in this big conversation.
What would be, as we close out, put you on the spot because I'm sure that there's, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm going to guess that you're going to know this. What are the top 5 best prospects for you?
Best prospects in terms of
new business,
actual companies?
New business. What would be 3 to 5 of the top? Because you mentioned hotels, you mentioned, and as you were mentioning hotels, I was thinking commercial real estate. Obviously, it plays the same part with leases, but you were talking about airlines, and then one of the things you mentioned earlier was Uber. But if you had to narrow it down to say 3 to 5 real target markets that you look at in say 2016 that you think are going to best benefit from the service, which would they be?
Well, for us, like we're a vertically focused organization, so we're looking to get deeper and deeper into the analytics behind revenue optimization in 2 main industries. Hotel and gaming is one, and multifamily housing is the other. There's tons of. It's probably not so broadly interesting to people outside of those industries, but there are tons of sort of adjacent opportunities in analytics in both of those industries that we're excited about right now.
Well, Dom, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to invite you back because I don't think I've done you justice enough. I'm going to learn more about the concept because I'm fascinated by what you guys do. I think a lot of our listeners are learning about things that they really hadn't heard before. It's kind of one of those things that you get when you get transparency and you peel back the onion skin, you realize, of course, these industries would have to do some of these things, but who knew? And I think we've only really begun the dialogue as far as TechDog is concerned. But thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for a few minutes today and to begin for us to explore the whole concept of demand generation and revenue management and the things that you guys are up to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very happy to take part in the conversation going forward as well. Thanks.